there was this big fight about the Epstein files. I don't know if I'm very interested in that. I mean, release the files, obviously, yes. There's kind of some personality drama around that. I hope the files are released, but we're starting to see more text messages and emails trickle out. And the favorite detail that was released this week is that Larry Summers, the former Harvard president, the famed Harvard economist, kind of genuinely very annoying person. I've had, personal, run-ins with Larry Summers. He was actually soliciting, as a married man, was soliciting advice on how to date younger women from Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, this, has now blown up Larry Summers' career and reputation. He's been let go of boards, from various assignments, from various affiliations. What are your thoughts about the Epstein, kind of writ large, this story, but then also writ small, the nexus with academia, the nexus with this kind of contemptible establishment figures like Larry Summers?
Man, whatever I say here, I'm not going to please anybody because
make everyone mad. That's how we get ratings.
Well, not everybody mad, but I actually think again, I just think there's like this massive conflation about who Jeffrey Epstein was and what he was doing, and in fact these. This flood of new documentation, and this might turn out to be wrong. We may actually learn that there's like way more sort of international intrigue in these documents and in this case than we previous realized. But what it looks like to me is there are like two things happening in tandem. On the one hand, you have the sort of maximalist case about Jeffrey Epstein, which is he is this kind of international player and an important piece of this kind of hidden elite infrastructure that passes resources back and forth between governments and powerful people. And I actually think that that's real. I think that Jeffrey Epstein did play some important part, and what he was doing exactly remains a total mystery to me. But there are just too many coincidences here. And what I've heard privately from people who had run-ins with him, we're not part of this inner circle, but kind of like we're in adjacent circles, is that he was running basically a massive tax evasion scheme. He was a guy who was hiding money for powerful people. And if you want something analogous to this, go look up the Panama Papers. There are various like tax schemes and shelters. And by the way, this is very useful for governments too, like with arms arrangements. And I think all the stuff that Epstein was doing that included these intelligence agencies, ours, Israel, England, may all very well be true. I would actually be surprised if it wasn't true. But that is one sort of category of activity that is separate from this other category of activity, which is that he was a pervert, okay? He was just a guy who was like really into, sleeping with young women, and he had a lot of prostitutes around, and probably one of the things he supplied for these powerful people he was doing business with in this other category was, if you're a guy like Larry Summers is like at the apex of the neoliberal establishment.
Yes.
Someone like that, or Reid Hoffman, who's been in these documents, or Noam Chomsky.
Neither of whom is very handsome, right?
They're
it's
all
like
dorks.
These guys are
they're
struggling.
Huge. Yeah. They're huge nerds. Okay, they're huge nerds, all of these guys. And they are important nonetheless. They have power. They have money. The one thing missing from their lives that they feel maybe entitled to is young women. And okay, this is where people are going to get mad at me, but it's like, should I be surprised that powerful men are interested in young women? I'm sorry. I'm not scandalized by that. I sort of expect that.
This is the first time in history that this has happened.
Yeah. Now, what I expect, however, is for them to keep it a secret. And the fact that they were so irresponsible with how they went about this is the part that's really the problem. Like, if you get caught, you deserve maximum punishment and shame. And so I'm glad they're getting shamed. But okay, so Epstein was running basically.
Well, that's like a meta problem. I mean, the problem is that, that they were soliciting or trafficking or, sleeping with underage girls and paying for it. That's the real problem. Well, but then what's mystifying is that these people were so reckless with how they talked about it. They felt they could operate with impunity. And it seems like Epstein, who did operate with impunity for many, many years, gave the sense that if you're in the Epstein bubble, not
Yeah.
only are moral boundaries dissipated and they disappear, but the practical boundaries also disappear because you're in the bubble of protection.
Yeah.
And they're emailing about it. It's like, how dumb are you? In addition to how depraved are you?
Well, okay. So in the thing that why Jeffrey Epstein is like like this scandalous figure who occupies so much space in like conspiracy theory land, and he's this like he's this figure. He's sort of like a symbolic figure that all these people are fixated on for various reasons, but there's this assumption that there must be some connective tissue between this one category of activity, which is like the depraved sex parties on the one hand, and the international intrigue on the other hand. And look, I am open to the possibility that that connective tissue exists. And maybe this is some elaborate like blackmail scheme, and there's some way in which having these people on the hook because of their, sexual habits might induce certain kind of favors for certain people when it comes to foreign policy or, whatever else these people are up to. But we kind of haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
And the thing that I keep thinking about, do you know the film Eyes Wide Shut, the famous Stanley Kubrick movie? And Tom Cruise is this he's this kind of hapless everyman doctor, striver type. And Sidney Pollack, who's the sort of Jeffrey Epstein-like figure, is hosting these depraved sex parties. And you're seeing this through the eyes of Tom Cruise, and you are led to believe, based on these various details, that this is some matter of like international intrigue. These are the, masters of the universe doing whatever they do, the smoke-filled rooms, and what kind of favors are they trading, and what's going on there? And then this girl shows up dead, and, real people's lives are being affected here. And there's this great scene at the end where Tom Cruise comes to Sidney Pollack to try to get to the bottom of this grand conspiracy that he thinks he's witnessed. And the answer is kind of unsatisfying.
Yes.
But Sidney Pollack is like, look, man, these are just a bunch of prostitutes, and we're just rich guys who like to engage with the prostitutes. And honestly, that's it. And nobody likes that answer. It's the boring answer, but it's probably the thing.
I think that's probably right. I think that he used the wealth, power, and connection to fund and to protect himself from what is, in a sense, a personal predilection. I don't think there's any evidence of widespread blackmail. It seems likely that if that existed, some of it would have leaked out at this point. Yeah. And I think if we're going to go for literary analogies, the one that I think is closest and most instructive is just The Great Gatsby. Yeah. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein is a really modern Great Gatsby style figure. And so, it's the romantic, it's love, it's infidelity. Obviously, The Great Gatsby, it's a little more innocent than Jeffrey Epstein, different era, long time ago. And the business element and the personal element were complementary parts of the person's character, but not inextricably linked as far as plot. That seems like it. And it seems like Jeffrey Epstein, too, in fairness, while it doesn't appear to be that official blackmail, it does appear that he did use all of this as a kind of a dead man's switch that is now seems to be going off, where people are implicated enough. He's got, emails or texts or photographs or flight logs where he has people who are kind of seduced by this image, by wealth, by connections, by young women that are connected with him enough so that he can use them as chips to do business with, to make other connections with, to make donations with. But ultimately, what's so fascinating to me about the Epstein thing is that ultimately he is a completely empty figure. He doesn't seem to be providing anything to anyone beyond the elements of a pyramid scheme with nothing at bottom. And I think that's why people are unsatisfied. They're like, what is it at bottom? I want a neat story that is like,
that's
he was blackmailing Bill Clinton, and there was prostitutes on the jet, and then there was the Mossad, shipping arms to, the Somalis or whatever it is. And it's like, hey, it's like, forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. It's just,
Yeah,
you're
well,
never going to
exactly.
get
Yeah.
there. You're never going to get
And
there.
this is, the lesson of every noir. You bring up
Yes.
Chinatown, but the lesson of every noir, the lesson that you come to after going down these conspiracy rabbit holes. There's a great book called Chaos by Tom O'Neill,
amazing.
I believe. Yeah, about the Manson family murders, and he starts pulling the sort of strings on this conspiracy around Manson, and he starts tying it to these, like intelligence operatives, and
Yep.
it's very compelling. And there is something there. There is something there. And as with Epstein, there is something there, but it's like
They never
the
get
big
to it.
smoking gun. The thing that is dispositive of the grand conspiracy is always just the next
Out of reach.
classified file away. It's always
Yes.
just, the next thing. And I think, unfortunately, real life is a little bit more boring than the story. And, another, actually, like the great film about this too is Burn After Reading, the Coen brothers film about this like intrigue in DC, and you're like constantly reminded it's more a farce than anything else. And I think in Epstein's case, while again, I think these are, by the way, let me just say this, okay? I feel like I have to say this. These are depraved individuals. I don't like support what Epstein was doing.
We disavow.
All these people are completely shameful, and they deserve every ounce of the humiliation, public humiliation that they're going to get. And I actually do think, these like girls, young girls, like being used in this way is like terrible. And these people are awful. These are really bad people. But that said, it is at bottom probably a more boring story than people want to believe. And so there's just like a lot of dissatisfaction around this. And I'm glad the files are out. I hope we can just now, we move on. This becomes one of these things that like it points to a specific place in time. Unfortunately, we don't have any good novelists anymore to make a good novel out of this. There's no Tom Wolfe to sort of write the novel about this. But it's very indicative of our time, and it's very indicative of how these large, grand, public spectacle conspiracies usually resolve.
Yeah, that's right. And really, it's the same pattern with Thomas Crooks or Tyler Robinson. And the reason why people grasp for these elaborate conspiracy theories or a Mossad element or the government is not telling us everything, in part because the government in these cases is not telling us everything, but also because people want to have some more elaborate and emotionally satisfying story. And the reality of it is pretty dismal, pretty banal, pretty ugly, and pretty pedestrian.
Yeah.
It's like this kid, Thomas Crooks, was kind of a loser, was kind of an outcast, was kind of dysfunctional. He spent we imagine a lot of time online. He went down the rabbit hole, and he had some switch that went off in his brain that we'll never fully understand, where he ends up on the roof, shooting a bullet through the ear of the former president of the United States. And like, that's not satisfying for many people in the same way that the Epstein story is not satisfying. But it doesn't mean that the conspiracy theories are true.